I am honored to introduce you guys to the SVP of Global Brand Partnerships at ESL, who will be joining me right now to talk about the impact of the pandemic on the esports industry. Please welcome Stephan Schröder. Hi, Stephan. How's it going?
Hi, how are you? Hi, nice to meet
Hi.
everyone.
Yes, Stephan,
Yeah.
welcome to the stream. Before we get started, will you just introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us what it is that you've been up to at ESL?
Yeah, sure. Stefan, I think I'm around about more than 1.5 years at ESL, responsible for our brand partnerships in the region of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And before that, I joined coming from the Nielsen company before I came over to ESL a couple of months before COVID hits us all.
Well, as you were saying, before COVID hit us all, it feels like a really long time ago that everything sort of went into lockdown. I do remember it was around February, March of last year when a lot of the esports events were starting to get cancelled, starting to move online. And we're now operating kind of the system where all of the events are online. So I wanted to ask you, how did the pandemic initially impact your job and what you're doing at ESL?
Yeah, it's a funny story, so to say. I started my first big event was planned for Katowice, which is one of the biggest ESL events overall. And on the last day, in the evening, the governor of the region decided, okay, this is without audience, and we cannot invite or we cannot bring our fans, our B2B partners, and so on in it. And that was really a scary situation. And from this day on, we have to move over to online only if possible. But since then, we wait for starting again with audience somewhere.
It's really interesting that you bring that up because I was also a Katowice working as a reporter. And I remember, like you, I sort of found out the day before the event started that we weren't allowed to have a crowd at the event. The players were still playing on stage and media, luckily, still had access. But I do feel like that was probably the last major esports event, probably in the world, where we had players properly play on stage, maybe with the exception of the League of Legends Worlds event that happened. So how did you handle that? Like you said, you had a lot of responsibilities to your guests as well. I guess, what was the sort of contingency after finding out that you basically had to replan everything you already planned?
Yeah, I think in Katowice it was classical problems. Okay, people are flying in and we have to tell them, okay, you can fly back. But after that, it was more convincing the clients that it's still interesting to stay in the esports industry, especially in my responsibility in ESL. And on the other hand, explaining them that esports is still alive. So we have the big advantage that we can move on to online events. When we have, on the other hand, all the traditional sports are not happening. So that was a big advantage. But on the other hand, if you think about brands which are not endemic brands, so there is no classical fit directly to esports, it's difficult to really explain why the online tournament alone is still so valid and so interesting. So it was a tough ride, to be honest. And every third week, we have to go back to our clients and tell them, oh, sorry, it looks like that the next events as well have to be rescheduled, postponed, or cancelled. But in the end, I'm really proud of the team, of the overall ESL team, and I think of the whole esports industry, that we managed it. And I cannot see a lot of brands going away from esports. It's more that, okay, the interest is going up.
Well, what would you say has been the thing that's helped you sway, brands and partners in these times? Because it's not easy to sort of explain to them that, yes, the sporting world have basically paused everything. A lot of the entertainment world basically just permanently in a limbo, but esports is still going on. So how do you go about sort of convincing this and getting this message across?
Yeah, on the one hand, it was a little bit easier than in traditional sports because it was always normal for our partners that part of the engagement is online. So it was always there on stream, if it's on Twitch or YouTube. So online was always a fundamental part of our partnerships. But the tricky part was that big brands always love to get in touch with the community as well on ground. So we try to keep them on board. And what we really developed in the last around about a year, try to develop new activation ideas, new possibilities for engage the community, but just then online, and give them the feeling that it's still a really cool thing, and it's really amazing to take a look at these players and what they are doing, and not having the feeling, okay, we are going back, that everyone is just gaming for himself.
Well, would you be able to give me a couple of examples of the activations and strategies you've had to execute over the last 12 months? Now everything has gone online.
Yeah, of course. I think first of all, we try to the biggest challenge was to really realize the events first of all, so that they are not in these big arenas. And we had some practical problems. For example, our crew was in North America when it was decided that no one is allowed to travel back to Europe or to come into the States. And so just one example where we really have to find solution that our execution crew is then coming back to our hubs. That means we have a hub in Cologne as well, one in Katowice in Poland. So we concentrated our staff at these places, and then we try to get the players in the places so that we can create studio events. But of course, as well, what we developed really fast was that we have more these virtual studio development that we always started with, but now we make a crash course and we optimize the technology development. I think these developments will be taking place, but with COVID, we have to hurry up. And I think that runs quite good. So, for example, we have in Cologne now a really full equipped virtual studio where it looks like that the people are somewhere as well. We brought the players into studio environments which are totally different than in the past. And we try to offer then around these virtual studios more visibility and new formats for our partners.
Well, how do you go about dealing with, an event like Cologne, as iconic as Cologne, not going online so much, but almost sort of getting cancelled? So how do you go about sort of still convincing not just partners and brands, but also fans that this is still worth tuning into and engaging with?
I think please don't forget, the fans are so they understand that. So we get so much positive feedback from Katowice because the people understand it wasn't our fault or our decision to cancel the audience. It was the government. And it's the same for Cologne, as you described. So I think the fans are really, they like that we try to care. And in the end, the fans see that we try to do everything to bring these events already there, that we try to really put them online and not to cancel them only. For example, we have a big event in Melbourne in Australia. We have to postpone it for a year. And of course, Australian fans were really disappointed about it. But in the end, they said, okay, it makes sense. And we have to be careful because COVID is so extremely dangerous. So in the end, the fans understand. And the sponsors and the partners behind, I think they make the same development. Okay, they are not happy. They would like to have the big activation ideas, the full arenas. But in the end, they see as well, it's cool that esports is still there. And what they see, when you take a look at the reach per event and per tournament, the reach was there. So the community was in front of the screen, of the stream in the end.
Well, you spoke about, the need to sort of maybe hurry up some of the plans and technology and developing things like virtual studios. Do you almost feel like in like a backhanded way that COVID has bred some very good ideas and setups that otherwise would never have happened?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think first of all, the technology development internally is really pushing through. So it's our company as well is more concentrated on developing new things, new features, and expand in the end the possibilities for our partners and as well having a good environment for the players. I think we cannot forget the players. So it was always, and it's still a challenge to get the players to one studio. So and very often we have to play everything online because it wasn't able. And going forward, we are really made progress on the technology side. On the other side, what you can see is that everyone was so there was a big willingness to cooperate. So that means the teams, the players, the fans, everyone had the feeling, okay, let's try to figure that out, but let's keep us online and not like a lot of traditional sports have to admit they were not really existing for a couple of months and still have the problem. And I think we managed it, that we are still regularly, you can follow every esports tournament every day. So I think that's a very good result in the end in a difficult pandemic, not to forget.
Well, what do you think the long term solution for this is? Let's say that this pandemic goes on for not just a year, but 2, 3, 4, 5 more years. I hope not. But so in the event if it becomes almost like a long term thing everybody has to deal with, what will be the solutions, in your opinion, to keep the brands and partners interested?
Yeah, I think we last year we just ran or we were behind the wave. So it was clear every third week, as I mentioned, we have to cancel or have to reschedule. For 2021, we said, okay, we have to come back on the wave. So, for example, we plan with just 2 events this year where we hope that we can have audience. And I think it's the same story for the following years. So we are going a little bit back in our development because before, I would say 2013 roundabout, these big arena events were not happening. So we were just online in the early days. And I think it's clear that we are concentrating more on the online tournaments, try to make them more attractive for the fans and for the audience. And on the other hand, concentrate on a couple of mega events if possible. And the good thing is that I think if the pandemic is going on, as we all expect, and that maybe in the second half of this year it's going a little bit more in the offline world as well, then we are prepared to do more offline tournaments because the plans are there. Last year it was the other way around. We thought, okay, there is an offline event, and then we have to admit, okay, it's just online. Now we change the perspective, and it looks like we are really ahead of the curve.
Well, how much time and how much notice does it take for you to sort of not to take an entire event online, but like you said, when you're not ahead of the curve and you do have to plan very, very, very well ahead of the events themselves, at what point do you pull the plug and go, this just absolutely cannot happen offline, and have to sort of start again and plan for everything to go online?
Yeah, tricky question. The answer is I don't know because it's always different. Last year we canceled sometimes event, I would say 3 weeks before the event will take place. This year we have a schedule for the full year, and we have a plan to have Cologne as an example with an audience, and this is in July. So of course we are in touch with the company who is heading up the arena just to make sure at what time we have to cancel it. So it's a couple of months, I would say, and if everything is running normal. But you know what is running normal right now. So I think the latest status is 6 weeks before. I would say we have to say, okay, now we change the environment will change, the tournament, whatever it is.
Well, one thing I've really loved is with events like the Pro League or Cologne, like you said, the ability to put them on, because these are international events, right? In the end of the day. So on a normal year, we're expecting like the North American teams and the European teams and teams from other regions to sort of compete together. But we're still able to have more localized tournaments. How much of an impact do you think this has had on both of the regional scenes, localized scenes, and also the international scene as a whole?
Yeah, of course. I think it was so cool to bring all these teams from the different continents together. So due to the online or internet connectivity, we have to be careful how we do the events so that no one has a disadvantage in the end. I think it's what I said is the situation is that everyone tried to be a little bit more closely together, but just online. But for me, it's clear. I think the local communities will be strengthened in the first place, and then, if it's possible, we go back to these more international and global approaches. But right now, I have the feeling that every region, every country, the community try to do as good as they can, and we try to bring really studio events at some point so that we have players in a studio together, and not that every player is working from home or from his team home, so to say.
How about the brands and partners? Have they kind of tried to change up their strategy at all to target more local and regionalized competitions? Well, given that now nobody can really have international tournaments.
Yeah, it depends a little bit. There are a couple of companies who are thinking about more local activities, but overall, I think the global tournaments that we have and others in the industry as well are still attractive because the reach numbers are really high. And when you take a look at the whole 2020, they are going up. Our most popular event was, I think, in the first wave of COVID, a couple of weeks after Katowice. So with really high audience numbers. And so that means for sponsors, still these global events are interesting. What we have, of course, is we have to develop and we have to learn together with our partners what we can do for them in an online world only. Because one example, one of our biggest partner, DHL, is always really engaged in doing activities and activations in the arena itself. They have these EFIBot, the robot that is running through the arena and so on, and nice stories around. But bringing these stories online and not making it boring is really a challenge. I think we are quite good in that, but of course there is room for improvement.
Again, I'm going to ask you about the long term. So how much are you putting into strategizing for your brands and partners to be able to replicate sort of the feeling of the activations they do in an arena or in a stadium onto the online platforms?
Yeah, I think it's getting more challenging in the long term to convince these brands who are not familiar with esports, because you cannot take the CEO to a full equipped 15,000 people arena in Cologne and explain him esports during the live final. So this is getting a little bit more tricky for salespeople. On the other hand, the community is still young, still diverse, still interesting for every brand outside. So I think we are staying attractive in the end. But of course, we cannot, how can I describe it? I think you cannot bring these last 10% onto the table, which were the offline ground experience. You have to think about making the other 90% more attractive.
Well, how difficult has it been, or easy, I guess, has it been to bring on new brands and new partners? Because, like you said, the ones that are already in tune with esports and are ingrained into the community are going to be a little bit more understanding in comparison to maybe ones that are just looking into this, given that the industry has done better than most, I would say, during the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. I think for new clients or potential new brands in esports, it was always the challenge is to bring esports to life, to really explain what is an engagement in esports, because it's totally different in comparison to most of the traditional sports. On the other hand, I think every brand takes a look at the news and see, okay, esports is still there. The numbers are good. The KPIs looks quite good, and the industry is growing. And as you described, I think a lot of industries are going the opposite way. So for us as esports, right now the situation is not good, because for no one the pandemic is good. But overall, these more digital focus from everyone, from every brand outside, is for us very good.
I know over the years, some brands have come in and done really well. They've made an impression on the fans. They've really sort of got their messages across. And we've seen some of those brands with ESL as well. From your perspective, especially during this pandemic, what would you say is the most important approach that new brands and new partners should have in mind if they want to come into this industry and succeed?
I think it's still the same if you have a pandemic or not, because community is really self-confident. So what we sometimes see that the partner just would like to have these, okay, I'm in esports, and then I can really get in touch with the community. Of course, he can get in touch with the community, but the community will not be engaged. So the biggest challenge is explaining the brands at the beginning or before they are really jump into an engagement, to explain them that the community is self-confident, what is good. And on the other hand, that means they have their opinion really fast. So the concept must always have in mind, is there an added value for the community? That means if you have a boring product, that doesn't mean you are not the right partner for esports, but you have to think about how you can communicate maybe in a more normal way or in a different way, and bring the community to love, or bring them that they have the feeling, okay, I can be engaged. That could be a small activation, but it could be as well an honest communication. For example, there are some products outside which are not really interesting, but everyone needs it. If we are talking about insurances or specific healthy products, you need it. It's not the most sexiest products alive, but on the other hand, I think the how to communicate with the community, it's really important that companies understand and accept that you cannot do it in the same marketing way they did it in the past.
Is there one particular activation or product or brand that you've particularly liked over the last 12 months?
Are there a couple of? I think I mentioned DHL because I know they are so engaged and try to bring really these offline experience into an online world. I like it, but there are tons of others. Overall, I think every brand try to be credible in this area. And what I really like is, because I had a lot of these crisis calls and crisis discussions with partners, that most of our partners say, okay, we understand it's difficult. And of course, in the online world, it's a little bit trial and error. So not every activation was quite amazing. But there are other examples, like we have Mountain Dew, the brand from Pepsi. We had Intel in it. The big partners were really still good in living these esports engagement in an online world.
Now, you don't have to mention any brand or names, but is there something that you would say that you wouldn't like to see brands do, or things that you feel like are mistakes they've done perhaps, or they've had the wrong approach into this industry?
Yeah, as I said, there are a couple of brands where you very often have the feeling they are not understanding esports. And to be honest, I'm in esports not 2 years, less than 2 years, and I must confess, and I do it every day, it's not so easy to understand everything, and it's not too easy understanding a community which is much younger than I am. And please don't forget, the decision makers in a lot of companies are a little bit older than the community. What is okay, but you have to respect that you are not maybe speaking the language of the community. So that means I always said to potential partners, if you would like to go to eSport, that doesn't mean you have to be the number one sponsor directly from the beginning, but please think about how you would like to develop your engagement, not starting, okay, just trial and error, do it on one event and then go away, or do it just with logo placements. I think logo placement is fine, has its relevance, but on the other hand, the cool things are where brands really try to find a story and then go to the community.
I mean, we've seen enough of them just sort of throwing money at certain situations and thinking that it's going to succeed. But I think the good thing about esports is that it's very easy to spot those. Like you said, the community are very in tuned. So I think you can't really fool them, like your intentions, your motivations. I just wanted to quickly ask you, in terms of the pandemic and in terms of the coronavirus, and I know, especially like you said on the news, it doesn't seem like it's really impacting the esports industry. It is, and I know that a lot of jobs are sort of very, very different now. People do have their challenges and stuff. What would you say has been one of your personal challenges since the pandemic has hit? Perhaps one that isn't usually as widely talked about?
Yeah, of course. It's when you think about new clients, it's so difficult to convince them just with online calls and not meeting them in person. I think that's a tricky part as well for all of us in ESL, but I think in all companies, just to manage our people, to manage our overall company, that's a big challenge because home office is nice, online conferences are nice, but I think the most important thing is personal interaction. And this is really challenging. And it's the same for the sales department where I'm sitting in. So that's really a big challenge. On the other hand, I think we are all, that's really cool, flexible. Think about where we are right now with all these online tools and possibilities and conferences like today a year ago. So that's really amazing, I must say.
Well, do you feel like we're going to continue to thrive even if events don't necessarily come back to lands anytime soon? Or do you feel like it's going to eventually do some big damage to the industry as a whole if we don't see like a major, major offline event for another 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I think it will not be. I think it will not damage really the industry. I see the next years for the esports industry quite positive. Maybe the rise is not so significantly like we all expected before COVID came across. But if you think about mobile gaming, which is one of the areas which is growing the most, and for us, really one of the topics we really push and focus on, and this will, of course, independently from events, this will raise. And I think there are always, and that's cool in esports, always new developments, new games coming in, new communities. Sometimes it's really difficult to find the right way, but I still think the way forward is quite positive.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned mobile games because I did want to ask you what the split is at the moment. Are people still sort of more invested into PC gaming and consoles, or do you see like a surge of brands and partners kind of diverting their attention to the mobile gaming?
Yeah, I think it's still PC and console games where most of the brands are involved, but more and more brands that know esports are just thinking about a mobile component, so that they have maybe a new vertical in mobile because they all see these unbelievable numbers. And I think what is interesting is it's not only watching esports. So take a look at the top athletes. It's more involving the big group of mobile gamers, which is for a lot of brands really interesting because it's a huge community. On the other hand, as we all know, mobile games are so different. So the communities per game, you have to think about how you can bring them together so that you are not having a partner for Asphalt 9 and on the other hand, having a partner for PUBG Mobile. The story is how to bring this mobile segment to partners and to convince them that this is the future.
Well, yeah. I mean, how do you bring this to your partners and convince them it's the future?
Yeah, it's really, really tricky. We have, for example, one product which we there have where we combine 6 games, and you are then can be a partner of all the 6 games. This is one option. But as I said, these mobile area is so fast developing. And when you take a look at, for example, at India, where PUBG Mobile is crashing all borders and have unbelievable numbers of gamers, and they have a huge final tournament, which is comparable then to the biggest events that we ever had in Europe. I think there are a lot of ways in the mobile industry. To be honest, I think we have going one way, but there are multiple ways to go in. So we are as well not at the end of the development here.
Well, how about the market in Europe? Because I do still feel like that it's not as big over here yet. How long do you think it would take for the likes of PUBG Mobile and other mobile games to really take off and kind of compete alongside the PC games in a region like Europe?
If you're thinking about the numbers of gamers, I think that's the question of some months and years, and then we have it in Europe as well with these high levels. I think what is the bigger challenge in Europe is right now that the most popular games in mobile gaming are shooter games like PUBG. And I think that's with brands in Europe, very often a discussion around violence and about that they have a company rule like, okay, we would like to get in touch with shooter. That's a discussion we have to face every day. The discussion is very often not so, I would say, not so deep in the company. It's a little bit more, okay, we heard there is a shooter game that's maybe not fitting. But first of all, it's a topic. And when we take a look in other regions, there we seldom have these discussion around, can we do shooter games with our brand or not?
I wonder why that is. But actually, in terms of that, do you find that over the pandemic and during the pandemic, that brands still have those kind of values, or are they a little bit easier to bend those because they don't have too many other avenues during a time like this?
Ooh, it's a tricky question. Not really. I think in general we have the discussion in the esports industry, which I find really interesting about the right brands. So, what is the sustainability of the brand that the brand is coming into esports? So, I mentioned that the community is very self-confident. So, if you have a brand which has maybe programs which are not really sustainable, as an example, or not pushing diversity as one of their company values, the community is really they find out and they will push that and they will open up discussions. So I think once again, brands who are interested in esports should think about it really in a more broader way before they jump in and be disappointed within a year.
You spoke earlier about what you are doing for the players and what the players positions are right now, because they are playing from home. I think some of them are fortunate enough that their organizations have like a centralized office where a couple of them could go in the office, provided it's safe, and play from there. But from that topic, I feel like, especially in a title like Counter-Strike, as we've seen in the last 12 months, and a title that ESL are very, very well known for, there's been some kind of talks and controversy and concerns over competitive integrity. Obviously, with everybody having their own setups and certain things being really difficult to regulate. I just wanted to know from your point of view that, players having their own technical setups and so on, and from a sales perspective, how important do you think it is integrity to sponsors and commercial partners?
Super important. It's a very important topic. Of course, it's not a daily touch point with partners, but I think it's a big danger for esports, for all the competitions, as well as it is in traditional sports. And to be honest, the more money the players can earn in esports is the same in other areas. Of course, there will be some guys who try to find a way and play not based on the rules. So I think it's a big topic. We know that we have a lot of we did a lot of investment with our league operations. That is the group who was really in touch with the players for our tournaments and try to figure out how we can get that under control, which is much more difficult. You're right, when the people have their own equipment at home. But anyway, I think we try to be there really transparent and try to push that hard, that we, of course, see integrity as one of the major things. If we cannot push that, then of course esports will crash. So for us, it's absolutely crucial to support every organization, and there are a couple of who is stealing. Oh, for example, we have an agreement with Sport Radar, who are checking suspicious developments if there are some of them, and so on. So I think it's really crucial for us to not underestimate problems of integrity that could occur in these pandemic times. You're right.
Well, there's a few questions in the chat. I'm going to ask as many as possible in the time constraint. I'm very sorry if I don't include your question, and if I don't, do feel free to reach out to Stephan. I believe you're going to be in the networking part, I hope, so you can ask him. I'm just going to go up on the top question, which is from PWR Gum, who asks, talking about brands, what do you think about startups who would like to get a foot into esports? Most teams looking for big budgets, which startups can't do. How could these startups approach a company like ESL?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's clear we are looking after partners for our tournaments. The players and the teams have their own lineup of partners, which is sometimes not so easy to align because they have maybe a different betting partner than we have, or a different supplier than we have. I don't know exactly if for a startup it's a question of investment. Of course, there is an investment behind, but overall, as I said, the community is very open to new developments and new technology developments, especially. So they are really interested in new things, so to say. And if a startup, and normally startups have very often new products, new services, whatever it is, I think there is a permanent interest in the community. So I think just we have to talk about it. I cannot really give an answer what is the exact problem, but overall, I think there is possibilities for every brand to engage in esports. But as I said, not only about I'm thinking about the money here. It's more about, okay, does it really fit, or what is the story that we can tell in the community?
Brilliant. Thank you. We have one more question, which is from Norma1286. They said, how is advertising in the field of esports tracked? Is it cost per view or per time viewed? And which tools are used for tracking the success or reach of ads in esports?
It depends a little bit. It's a little bit of a technical question. For example, if the biggest streaming platform is Twitch, and if you are an advertiser in Twitch, you get a second-by-second report from Twitch. So automatically they track how many people saw the advertising, and as well how many people click on the advertising, and all these different things. So this is tracked 100% accurate. If you are a partner of ESL, for example, we track on our big tournaments visibility of partners via the company Nielsen. So that means if DHL, because I'm named this partner, is visible in an in-game rotation, then a company, an independent company from us, track it, how many seconds you are on screen, and in the end, put a CPM behind it and make a calculation and a media value. So I must say, in comparison to traditional sports, esports is a little bit behind what tracking of advertising, in comparison, but I think the esports industry is making their big progress so that you can measure everything in the end.
We have one more question left. It's a quick one. Will ESL also engage more in XR Esports?
What is XR Esports? I'm sorry.
To my understanding, it's like a software infrastructure. It's like a tool. I'm not 100% sure what it is. I was kind of hoping you would. But from my understanding, it is some kind of tool that's going to help gamers and influencers. Yeah. I could be wrong. Yeah.
Maybe.
I guess that's a no.
Yeah, right. For now, it's a no. But to be honest, this is maybe something the question, the guy who asked the question can give us a little bit information later on, because then I maybe can answer it. Right now, I must say I have no idea.
That's okay. I appreciate
Sorry.
your honesty. And Nemon0xx0R, if you could explain a little bit more about what XR Esports, that would be great in the chat. I'm actually really interested as well. So feel free to. Oh, he said VR or AR. So he means virtual reality
Okay.
or
Yeah.
augmented
Yeah.
reality.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, it's a big topic. I cannot say about the tools, but in general, you must think about ESL as an organization where we always have the difficulty that games are maybe at some point not so popular anymore, and new developments came across all day long. So we have a department that looks into these new possibilities. I mentioned the virtual studio. We are trying to work with AR games to really find out, is this interesting for our partners? So we are really making how to say, we try to be trendsetter, and on the other hand have a fine feeling what is going on in developments in the market. So there is really a focus on, and these topics, of course, AR and VR, are very important for us to check if this is maybe the next big thing. Right now, we think mobile is the next big thing, but we say that for a couple of years now. But maybe this is coming then next.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Stephan. We really appreciate your time. That was a very, very interesting interview. And thank you to everybody that asked a question in chat. If you have any more questions, make sure to drop into the network session later. But for now, that is everything from me and Stephan. Thank you so much for joining me.